She slid a note into my favorite book. Meet me after closing. I didn't know then that one quiet evening in the empty library would change everything. The first time I noticed her properly, I didn't even realize it was happening. I'd been lost among the stacks, thumbing through old novels and journals, when a movement at the far end of the library caught my eye. She was arranging books with a quiet, precise grace that made the air around her seem softer somehow. Her hair, dark with streaks of chestnut lightened by the sun, fell gently around her shoulders. Every motion was deliberate, yet fluid, like she belonged to this world of silent knowledge and worn pages more than anyone else ever could. It wasn't just her beauty, it was the calm confidence she carried. I watched as she reached for a book on the upper shelf, stretching just enough to reveal the curve of her neck. A small smile touched her lips, almost invisible, as though she found private amusement in the world of words surrounding her. For a moment, I froze. I didn't know if it was curiosity or something deeper, something unfamiliar and quietly thrilling. And then came the note. I found it tucked in the spine of a book I'd been reading for weeks, a book that had become a kind of comfort. The paper was delicate, almost fragile, and the handwriting was neat, elegant, and distinctly hers. Meet me after closing. I ran my fingers over the words, feeling a warmth I couldn't explain. My pulse quickened. Part of me wanted to leave it, to respect the boundaries I knew existed. But another part, the part one didn't fully understand, wanted to know more, to see her in that quiet, empty world she must know so well. I began to notice her in ways I hadn't before. The subtle scent of vanilla and aged paper that seemed to cling to her, the slight crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the soft sound of her footsteps against the polished floor. Every little detail drew me closer, made the thought of meeting her after hours both intoxicating and terrifying. There was hesitation, too. I couldn't ignore the age gap. She was mature, confident, a woman who had lived more, felt more, than I had. Could she see me as more than a boy fumbling among books? Could I see myself as worthy of the quiet intimacy her note implied? These thoughts tumbled in my mind as I lingered near her aisle, pretending to read, but stealing glances whenever she wasn't looking. Yet beneath all that hesitation was curiosity, and beneath curiosity, an undeniable pull. The note was a key, and the locked door it hinted at was somewhere deep in the rhythm of the library, waiting for me to take the first step. I didn't know what awaited me after closing, only that I wanted to find out. And so I carried that note like a small secret, a tiny spark of something new and uncharted. The library felt different now, as if every rustle of pages and shaft of sunlight was charged with possibility. That evening, as I left and the golden light faded across the quiet street, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The woman who had turned a simple library visit into the beginning of a story I wasn't ready to tell anyone else. After finding her note, I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I returned to the library, my eyes kept drifting toward her, watching her move among the shelves with the same quiet elegance that had first captivated me. But now there was a new layer to her presence, an unspoken invitation that lingered like a soft vibration in the air. I held the note in my pocket more times than I could count, tracing the delicate curves of her handwriting with my fingertips, feeling a warmth that made my chest tighten in anticipation. I hesitated, repeatedly asking myself whether I should actually go through with it. Logic whispered caution. She was older, experienced, composed. I was younger, still figuring out my place in the world. What if I misread the gesture? What if I ruined whatever subtle connection we had by being too forward? And yet, the thought of her, the imagined quiet of the library after hours, and the possibility of sharing a private conversation with her made me ache with curiosity. During the days before our meeting, I noticed the little things I hadn't before. The way sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting a golden glow across her face as she reached for a book. The faint scent of vanilla and paper that clung to her hair. The small, unconscious gestures that betrayed her own vulnerability. The way she adjusted the cuff of her sleeve when she thought no one was looking. The soft sigh she let out as she shelved a particularly heavy volume. Every detail felt magnified, charged with possibility. Even our casual interactions became loaded with quiet tension. When our hands brushed while reaching for the same book, a spark of warmth shot through me. I felt it, even though I tried to ignore it, a subtle reminder that the connection between us was no longer just intellectual. It was something more, something intangible. And yet, the brief contact left me restless, my mind spinning with what-ifs and imagined scenarios. I found myself imagining the library after closing. The fluorescent lights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of desk lamps. The shelves looming like silent sentinels, the faint scent of aged paper filling the air. I imagined her there, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence, speaking softly, maybe smiling at some private joke. The anticipation became almost unbearable, a sweet tension that wrapped around my chest like a living thing. But it wasn't only desire that kept me on edge, it was also hesitation, a deep awareness of the gap between us. She had lived more, experienced more, and carried herself with a quiet dignity that I wasn't sure I could match. Yet, the pull toward her persisted, subtle but insistent, like gravity drawing me closer to something I didn't fully understand. And so I lingered, both near and far, observing, imagining, waiting. Every day in the library became an exercise in quiet yearning, a delicate balance between restraint and the thrill of curiosity. I didn't yet know what would happen after closing, only that the thought of her, the note, and the empty library made my heart beat faster and my mind endlessly spin with the promise of something extraordinary. The moment finally came. The library was silent, the usual hum of activity replaced by the faint creak of floorboards and the soft rustle of pages in the dim light. I arrived early, nerves tightening like a coil in my chest, gripping the note she had slipped into my favorite book. Every shadow seemed charged with anticipation, every beam of light a spotlight on the possibility of what was to come. And then she appeared. She moved with the same quiet elegance that had captivated me from the start, but now there was something different in her gaze, a softness, a deliberate warmth that made me suddenly aware of my own heartbeat. She smiled when she saw me, small and knowing, and for a moment, words felt unnecessary. The air between us was alive with tension, a delicate acknowledgement of shared curiosity and unspoken understanding. We started with conversation, tentative at first. Books, authors, and memories of childhood reading formed the backdrop, but underneath, a deeper current ran. I found myself leaning slightly closer, drawn by her presence, noticing the subtle way her fingers brushed against the edges of the book she held, the gentle tilt of her head when she laughed softly at a thought she didn't voice. Her voice was low, soothing, like a melody weaving through the quiet library, and I felt an unexpected comfort in its cadence. She asked me questions too, not probing, but genuine, revealing glimpses of herself, what she cherished, what she feared, the quiet corners of her life she rarely shared with anyone. And I listened, truly listened, the words sinking in, leaving me with a sense of intimacy I had never expected from a single evening in a library. Every small gesture, every glance that lingered too long, seemed amplified in the stillness around us. There were moments of near contact. Her hand brushed my arm as she reached for a book, lingering slightly longer than it needed to. I felt the warmth of her skin, the subtle pulse of energy passing between us, and I realized that this quiet closeness was both thrilling and terrifying. We moved naturally toward a small reading table, sitting side by side. Our knees nearly touched, the space between us small enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her. Yet I respected it, conscious of the fragile tension that hung in the air. The library, usually a place of study and silence, transformed into a private world, suspended in time. Every sound, the creak of the chair as she shifted, the soft sigh as she turned a page, seemed magnified. The dim light of the desk lamp cast gentle shadows across her face, highlighting the subtle curve of her cheek, the delicate line of her jaw. I wanted to reach out, to let my hand brush against hers, but restraint held me, a mix of reverence and uncertainty. By the end of the evening, something had shifted. The note that had seemed so simple, so playful, had led to a connection deeper than I had imagined. We left the library together, the world outside suddenly too bright, too loud, yet filled with the quiet, electric promise of what might come next. My mind was buzzing with anticipation, my heart steady yet achingly aware of the subtle pull she had ignited. That night, I realized that what started as curiosity had begun to bloom into something far more profound. After that first evening, the library took on a new meaning for me. Every visit was charged with a quiet tension, a careful dance of observation and restraint. I found myself noticing her in ways I hadn't before, not just her movements or her smile, but the little, unintentional gestures that hinted at vulnerability and warmth. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the small sigh when shelving a heavy book, the faint curve of her lips when she caught me looking. Each detail pulled me in deeper, building an intimacy that words alone could never capture. It began subtly. A brush of hands while passing a book, a shared laugh over a forgotten title, the light touch of her fingertips as she guided me to a shelf. Each moment was fleeting, yet it left a mark, a warmth that lingered long after the library emptied and the doors were locked. I noticed how her presence seemed to occupy space differently around me, the quiet confidence tempered by gentle attention, the kind of attention that made me feel seen in ways I hadn't expected. We started spending longer periods together after closing, lingering in the reading rooms where the golden lamplight softened the edges of reality. One evening, she adjusted a book in my hands, her fingers brushing mine just enough to send a subtle shiver down my spine. I caught myself staring at the way her hand moved, the elegance of it, and felt a strange mix of awe and desire. It wasn't about the touch alone. It was about the unspoken message behind it, trust, curiosity, and a quiet acknowledgement of what we both felt. There were other gestures too, small, deliberate, and intimate in a safe, gentle way. When she passed me a volume across the table, our hands overlapped for a moment, long enough to make my pulse quicken. When she adjusted the lamp, our shoulders brushed, and the warmth of her presence seemed to seep into me. Even our laughter shared in whispered tones across the stacks carried weight, a subtle intimacy that grew without needing explanation. Conversations deepened alongside these gestures. We shared thoughts about life's quiet regrets, fleeting moments of happiness, and the things we rarely voiced aloud. Her eyes would soften when she spoke, her hands sometimes finding a resting place near mine, never imposing, always considerate. In those moments, I felt an emotional closeness that matched the physical one, a connection that went beyond attraction into something more profound, a sense of being understood, of being valued. And yet, restraint remained a constant companion. I was acutely aware of the age gap, of the social expectations that hung like a shadow at the edges of our encounters. But those concerns were balanced by the undeniable pull between us, a gravity that drew me closer with each lingering glance, each brush of skin against skin, each shared silence filled with meaning. By the end of these evenings, I found myself both exhilarated and unsettled, caught between desire and caution, longing and patience. But I understood that this slow build, the tentative touches, the quiet laughter, the shared confidences, was the very essence of what made our connection rare and precious. And in that careful, deliberate unfolding, I realized that the library had become more than a place of books. It was a sanctuary where trust, intimacy, and unspoken desire could grow at their own, perfect pace. The library had grown quiet, more than usual, the way it did when the last patrons had left and the world outside seemed to fade into soft twilight. That evening, I arrived with a mix of anticipation and nervousness that tightened in my chest like a coil. The note had brought us together, yes, but now the silence between us carried the weight of unspoken thoughts, and I could feel her awareness of it as keenly as my own. We sat side by side at the reading table, close enough that our knees nearly touched, close enough that I could sense the warmth radiating from her. She spoke softly, her voice low and deliberate, about things she rarely shared with anyone, moments of loneliness, regrets she had tucked away, fleeting joys that had shaped her life. Each word was a revelation, each pause a window into a private world I was only just beginning to glimpse. I listened, genuinely, absorbing not just her words but the subtle cues she offered, the way her fingers traced the edge of a page, the faint catch in her voice when speaking of disappointment, the quiet smile that accompanied memories that still brought her happiness. I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to offer some physical comfort, my hand over hers, a reassuring brush of the arm, but restraint held me back. This was new, delicate, and I didn't want to risk disturbing the fragile intimacy we were building. And yet, the tension between us had grown undeniable. I could see it in her eyes, the way they searched mine for understanding, the way her lips curved in hesitant amusement when I made a quiet, self-deprecating joke. My own chest tightened as I realized I had to acknowledge my feelings, not just the curiosity that had brought me here, but the deeper, quieter pull toward her. I found myself whispering words I hadn't yet spoken aloud to anyone, that I felt drawn to her, that something about her presence unsettled and calmed me in equal measure. She didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, fear crept in. Had I misread everything? Had I pushed too far? Then, slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand over mine. The touch was soft, grounding, and yet it carried a weight far heavier than mere physical contact. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that she felt it too, the same magnetic, tender pull that had grown between us over these quiet evenings. The library around us seemed to fade further, leaving only the soft glow of the lamp, the scent of aged paper, and the quiet rhythm of our shared breath. That single touch spoke volumes. It was both a promise and a question, a gentle affirmation that the connection we had was real, mutual, and worth exploring with patience and care. In that moment, I understood something essential. This wasn't about rushing toward romance or abandoning caution. It was about trust, about letting ourselves be seen and understood, about allowing vulnerability to coexist with desire. And as we sat there, hands touching lightly, hearts quietly acknowledging the same truth, I knew that whatever came next would be guided not by impulse, but by the slow, deliberate unfolding of something rare and profoundly human. By now, the library after hours felt like a separate world, a quiet sanctuary suspended between reality and possibility. Each evening I arrived, my anticipation mingled with a strange comfort, as if the air itself knew the secret we were slowly weaving together. There was a rhythm to our meetings now, a gentle cadence that required no words but spoke volumes. Shared glances, brushing past each other in the stacks, the soft click of pages being turned under the warm lamplight. One evening, as we sat side by side at a long oak reading table, something shifted in the smallest, most ordinary way. I was reading aloud, a passage from a book she had recommended, when she leaned just slightly toward me, her head resting briefly against my shoulder. The weight was light, almost casual, yet it sent a ripple of awareness through me. I felt the warmth of her hair against my arm, the steady rise and fall of her breath, and something inside me softened in ways I hadn't anticipated. She didn't speak, and I didn't either, but the silence between us was full, not empty. I sensed trust growing in that quiet space, a mutual understanding that intimacy wasn't measured in words alone. I could feel her fingers occasionally brushing against mine as she turned pages or adjusted a book, each touch brief but laden with meaning. It was as if the library itself had slowed to match the rhythm of our hearts, giving us the freedom to explore closeness without haste or expectation. We shared laughter too, small bursts of sound that seemed almost scandalous in the hushed library, moments when our eyes met and lingered just a beat too long. Her smile was warmer than it had ever been before, touched with a hint of softness reserved only for me. I felt an unfamiliar ease, a sense of belonging that made the quiet space around us feel like home. There was also a sense of mutual protection in our gestures. When I reached for a book she had picked out for me, she lightly guided my hand, her touch firm yet gentle, the kind of reassurance that made me realize how much she cared, even in subtle, nonverbal ways. I responded in kind, adjusting a chair for her, offering my coat when she shivered slightly, letting our actions speak where words might fail. Even in moments of silence, the closeness was tangible. I could feel the warmth of her presence pressing against me, subtle shifts as she leaned or moved, and the quiet acknowledgement that neither of us needed to fill the air with unnecessary conversation. It was in these moments, sitting so close, sharing the same light, the same quiet energy, that I truly understood the depth of what was developing between us. By the end of the evening, I felt a new kind of calm, a certainty that what had begun as curiosity and intrigue had blossomed into something far deeper. Our first true closeness wasn't marked by dramatic gestures or declarations. It was in the gentle touches, the quiet laughter, the shared warmth, and the unspoken promise that whatever we were discovering it together. And as we left the library side by side, the lingering brush of our hands a silent reminder. I knew the next step, whatever it might be, would come naturally, guided by the trust and affection we had nurtured so carefully. The library had become our secret world, a place where time slowed and the outside pressures of life felt distant. Every meeting after hours carried the weight of anticipation, the subtle intimacy of shared space, and the gentle acknowledgement of what we were building together. But now, after weeks of tentative gestures, lingering glances, and quiet conversations, something had shifted. There was a calmness between us, a sense of knowing and acceptance that had grown naturally, patiently, like a vine climbing toward light. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the library's tall windows reflected the amber glow, we sat together on a familiar bench near the history section. I could feel her presence beside me as a steady warmth, the subtle rise and fall of her breathing matching my own. Our hands brushed lightly, a gentle acknowledgement of closeness that no longer felt startling or forbidden, just comforting and familiar. Her fingers lingered for a moment, then rested near mine as if drawn by the same quiet gravity that had brought us together from the start. Conversation flowed easily, a mix of everyday observations and deeper reflections. We shared memories, small triumphs, and unspoken worries, but always with the awareness of each other's comfort. The age gap, which had seemed so daunting at first, now felt less significant than the connection we had cultivated. It wasn't about the years between us. It was about trust, attention, and the mutual care that underpinned every interaction. There were small gestures, intimate in their simplicity, that spoke louder than words. I adjusted a book on a high shelf, and she offered a soft smile that lingered, brushing against the corners of my heart. When I handed her a volume she had wanted, our fingers touched, and the warmth felt like a quiet affirmation. We laughed together at small absurdities, leaned in for whispered comments, and found joy in the shared rhythm of our presence. These were moments of closeness that felt infinitely more profound than any dramatic declaration. By the time we left the library, twilight had settled outside, painting the street in muted golds and blues. We walked side by side, our steps synchronized without effort. My hand brushed against hers, tentative at first, then lingering with quiet confidence. There was no rush, no need for grand gestures, just the steady, comforting acknowledgement of what we had discovered in one another. As we reached the doors, I realized how far we had come. What had begun as a curious note slipped into a book had transformed into a deeply human connection, one built on patience, understanding, and slow-burn affection. I glanced at her, and she returned the look with a quiet warmth that said more than words ever could. In that glance, I felt a promise, not of perfection, not of a story free from challenges, but of something rare and meaningful, mutual recognition, respect, and the willingness to grow together. The library faded behind us, but the bond remained. Every gentle touch, every shared smile, every quiet moment of understanding had led to this, an ordinary evening imbued with extraordinary intimacy. And as we walked into the quiet night, our hands brushing lightly, I knew that this was only the beginning of a story written in small gestures, tender glances, and the slow, steady unfolding of something real and lasting.